Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Inside Archaeology, where we dig in to the study of human history through our artifacts, monuments, and remains. A journey through time that uncovers the mosaic of human civilization. Today, I'm very happy to bring you another video in my Ask an Archaeologist interview series. This time, our guest is Kayleigh During from the History with Kayleigh YouTube channel. While she is not an archaeologist, she is what I would call a heritage influencer. Her channel has over 160,000 subscribers and over 10 million views. She has no formal archaeological training, but she does lots of research to make her videos on ancient stone structures, human evolution, archaeological discoveries, ancient queens, and inventions from the ancient world. If you've been here for some time, you know that Kayleigh reached out to me a while ago about collaborating on videos for our channels. And it's taken us quite a long time to set it up, so I'm really pleased that our schedules have finally aligned so that we can make these videos for you. One thing I really enjoyed about this interview was speaking with somebody who's not from a traditional archaeology background, but who is still clearly a success and really passionate about promoting heritage in media. On Kayleigh's channel, you can find a video with me talking about prehistoric stone structures and Neolithic farmers, which is linked here and in the description for you to check out next. Okay, let's dig in. All right, time to
Welcome to
pack
the
up our
channel,
trowels.
Kayleigh.
That's everything for today.
Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed
It's
my
such a
interview
pleasure
with Kayleigh.
to
We
have
had
you
a great
here.
time filming it, and I'm
Viewers
sure
who
that
have
it's
been
not going
around
to be
for
the
a
last
while
collaboration we
know
do.
that Kayleigh and
Don't
I have
forget
been
to comment,
corresponding for
like the video, or
quite a
subscribe
while
to
now,
both our
and we've been
channels
trying to
before you
set up
leave.
this a
If you are
collaboration
feeling
to
extra
happen,
generous,
yeah, for
you can
not
go
an
and give me a
insignificant
super
amount of
thanks,
time. So the
or if you're
calendars
feeling
and the
extra
stars have
generous, you can
finally
grab me.
aligned to bring
If
us
you're feeling
together
extra
today,
generous, you
so
can
we
give
can
me a
talk a
super
little bit
thanks
more
or go to
about
my
Kayleigh's
Ko-fi page,
experience
which is in the
working
description, and
as
support me with
an
a small
influencer
donation
in the
of like
area
$1 or
of
$2.
history,
Taking a few
specifically most
seconds to
popularly
support
on
me in
YouTube, but
any way
also
that you
on
can, if
Instagram.
it's
I'm
just
going to jump
liking or
right
subscribing
into
or
my first
making a
question,
donation,
which is
really
what
helps me grow the
inspired
channel
your
so that
love
I
of
can
history?
continue to provide you with
Well, from
quality
a very young
heritage
age,
content
I've
that
always
you can
had
trust is
the
well sourced,
big
researched, and
question
presented by
of
someone who is an
where do we
expert in this
come from?
subject.
Because we're here
Thank you
now,
so much for
but
watching today.
what
Stay
happened
curious,
before
and I
us?
hope to
So
see
from a
you on
young
my
age,
next adventure
I
into the world of
very much
archaeology.
loved the historic view and like programs on TV, documentaries about history. And when I was about like 7, my mom had this like massive stack of encyclopedia books, and I used to skim through them. And then one day I came across Stonehenge and the pyramids in Egypt and all of that stuff. And I was amazed, and I read that it was really, really old. And for like a 7-year-old, that's like a few thousand years old. You can't comprehend and you want to know more. It intrigued me. So, yeah, history was the best subject I excelled in school. And yeah, back in 2020, I decided to do something with this passion that I feel for history.
Yeah. So that actually is an excellent segue into my next question of like what specifically like spurred you to start doing a history themed YouTube channel?
Well, I used to make like sort of cat videos where I filmed my cats doing fun stuff just to learn how to edit and film and understand how YouTube works. So that was my trial thing that I did on my channel. It used to be called Candy Cats, Kand Cats, because those are my initials. But of course, I knew that wasn't going to bring me anywhere, and it was just for fun for me. So one day I sat down and I figured that I felt this desire to do YouTube for real. And I was stuck between two subjects for my channel. One was history, and the other was true crime, because I love true crime. I'm that kind of girl that just, I watched true crime way too much when I was young. So, but the passion I felt for history drew me into it. I was depressed. I was already looking into ancient things. I was already reading excavation papers for fun. I don't know who does that for fun. I did. And then one day, after watching Outlander, the first episode for the very first time, it dawned on me that this was what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about ancient structures and the ancient world and the historic past of our society. So I found an excavation paper on Callanish in Scotland on the Isle of Lewis and Harris, and I decided to make a video on it. And from there, it kind of snowballed into what I'm currently doing, which is mostly human evolution at this point,
Mm.
and a little dash of Stone Age and new archaeological discoveries.
And you've been very successful at it, so congratulations.
Thank you.
What is your favorite ancient civilization and why?
Well, two things, because you say civilization. As a
Culture.
civilization, it's Egypt, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
And as a culture, it's the Neolithic culture, especially the megalithic builders, because they made these stone structures that we still see today. At the same time, like the Maltese structures and the culture that created them, the Neolithic people that eventually just vanished, they're kind of, yeah, on the top of my
Mm.
scale when it comes to like my favorite. I have these coasters that I bought when I was in Malta, and yeah, I mean, I took a bit of a temple with me at home, and I can look at it whenever I want.
Oh,
That's
that's
how much
lovely.
I love the Maltese temples and the builders and their culture. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, speaking of those things as well, we have also done a video as part of this collab on Kayleigh's channel where
Yeah.
her and I talk all about megalithic tomb builders. So that is going to definitely be linked here if you guys want to watch that as well. Going back to this interview though, you don't have an educational background in history, but would you ever consider going back to study it perhaps at some point, especially since you've had so much success on YouTube?
There might come a time in a couple years where I would be open to educate myself on archaeology as a whole, I think. Like I would pick the field of archaeology and then study that if I were to go to if I were to choose to,
Hmm.
follow an education. At the same time, if I'm going to be very, very blunt and honest, at this point in my life, I have to ask myself, what way would that be helpful
Hmm.
at this point? Because if I were to study archaeology, it's going to take a lot of my time,
Hmm.
nearly all of my time, to be completely honest. And I do not have the proper background education. I'm officially a high school dropout. I have studied construction to become an architect between 2009 and 2011. I had to drop out because of the global recession, which was fun, and all the construction companies in the Netherlands were going bankrupt. None of the surviving ones wanted a female as an intern because a guy can do much more work. And I was the first girl to study construction in like 30 years at that particular school. So I have tried studying again in the past on a higher education level, and it didn't work for me.
Mm.
And it cost me a lot of money. I'm still paying that off as we speak.
Hmm.
So it would have to be me being very, very rich, which probably will never happen. But if in the case that it's gonna happen, I am very open to it. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that because obviously I have pursued a more traditional trajectory in terms of I
Yeah.
went to school for an undergrad and I got a master's, etc. But I actually know so many people when I worked in archaeology who I came across who were people that came to it a lot later in life. So there were people that I worked with who, started off as construction workers, some of them, and they got involved in archaeology and they've worked their way up. And then they went back to school like much later in their life, especially also like for people who want to do PhDs. A lot of the time, it's whether or not you should do a PhD or whatever. I'm not talking about you specifically, but when people are asking that question, a lot of the advice that I hear and that I give is, you should only do something like that if you have the time And if
Yeah.
it's a project that you feel really, really passionately about, you shouldn't be going into it with like an idea of like, oh, well, this is going to make me a professor, because that's not like a guaranteed outcome, right? But definitely it is something that a lot of people I've come across, like they retire and they go back to school and they get degrees in it.
Yeah,
So, it's not something that's ever outside the realm of possibility. And
for
certainly as
sure.
well, especially in the UK, they're really trying to open up a lot of different pathways to get into it. So, Historic Environment Scotland is really looking into the idea of like apprenticeships and like non-traditional ways for people to get involved. Whether or not that's something that applies or appeals to you, it's certainly something that other people can look at as well, who are maybe like yourself and they just haven't been able to find a pathway into archaeology via that traditional route. Moving on to our next question. Has studying history and archaeological topics changed your mind on anything that you thought that you knew before?
Definitely. Before I started my historic journey on YouTube, so to speak, my view of the ancient world was very skewed,
Mm,
very much so of the old standard view of it, I think. Because many decades ago, there was this idea of how the ancient world looked like and what the people were like. And especially when I started looking into the human evolutionary timeline, my perception of the ancient world and its inhabitants completely changed.
mm,
The fact that we've had Neanderthals who adorned themselves with feathers, who were able to create glue from birch bark, who did all these amazing things hundreds and thousands of years before we were here, like at least 1 or 200,000 years before we became the Homo sapiens and that we are today. That changes everything. And then I looked into like the invention of stone tools. The oldest stone tools predate so many of the species that have lived before us in our human evolutionary timeline. And like the oldest evidence of created fire could possibly go back 1.4 million years, which means that it was probably Homo erectus that was able to create fire for the first time themselves. It's not completely proven without a doubt, it's
mm,
still contested, but we know that Homo erectus had fire 1.4 million years ago. The question is just, did they create it themselves or did they use a source
mm,
to then use that fire and try and keep it going for as long as possible?
mm,
Or like Homo erectus, same species, like it's the first of our Homo genus, it's like our oldest direct ancestor. They traveled to Indonesia around 1.4 million years ago.
mm,
Indonesia are islands, not close to the shore. Like, so we were much more advanced in our timeline than we thought. And I
mm.
had no clue that we were that sophisticated already before our species had even emerged, had
Yeah,
even evolved.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty common thing. I mean, I said this in your video, but I think it bears repeating that one of my favorite quotes from one of my professors was like, just because they're ancient doesn't mean they're stupid.
yeah,
And I think that oftentimes gets a bit confused sometimes.
yeah,
And yeah, they're so much smarter than just people tend to give them credit for.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
because and as well, like everything that they did led to where we are today. So next question is, what is the most like surprising or cool thing that you've like discovered or come across during your research?
Oh, that's probably going to be the wind catchers in Yazd,
Mm,
Iran. I covered them on my channel, and an amazing friend of mine, Nick from Found and Explained, the YouTube channel, he was able to, he offered to create 3D renders for that video for me because he came up with the idea. he brought the whole subject of wind catchers in Yazd to me
Mhm.
simultaneously, while another friend also brought that subject to me. So that was two people that have nothing to do with history whatsoever. Both came across an article about wind catchers, brought it to my attention, and then he offered to make a 3D render. And I went to research it. And I was just amazed that the people in Yazd, Iran, actually created the most basic kind of air conditioning with
Mm,
these wind catchers.
yeah,
The sophistication of them, it's astounding to me.
yeah,
So yeah, that's one of those big ones for me, for sure.
yeah. And I think also makes an interesting point that I feel like is something that I think is going to be a trend as we continue our journey as a species along this trend right now of sustainability. I
Yeah,
think, you know, our culture of living very disposably, I think that's like the best way I can think of us describing it, is very recent, right?
yeah,
Like we've only had the luxury of being able to throw things away when they break, like all the time, like very recently.
yeah,
And for, millennia, people have been living much more sustainably and more, I guess, more in tune in some ways. And it's not to, I don't want to glorify and say that like ancient people always lived in harmony with their environment because that isn't
no,
necessarily true. But certainly they had to be a lot more sustainable and I think a lot more longer term in thinking and how they did things. They couldn't afford to make things that didn't last and they had
yeah.
to learn how to recycle things. So I think that that's going to be a really interesting theme that we see coming across in terms of like looking at research and how people used to do things and how we can adapt the way that they did that to modern day to help
Yeah.
us live more sustainably.
I also think that an example for that sustainability that they had is the fact that some people that were buried in ancient times had like their weapons with them or their stone tools or basic things like that. And people look often, people from outside of this sphere of history and archaeology and the people with a little bit of knowledge, if they're not part of that, they look at it and they say, yeah, well, that's, of course, they were buried with like their favorite weapon or their
Mm,
most used stone tool. But at the same time, you have to think about the fact that the people around them could have used that weapon or could have used that stone tool. The fact that they were buried with it
yeah.
means that either they were very important to the people around them, or the fact that the stone tool or the weapon was very important to them and they
Mm,
had the respect of the community to be buried with it.
mm,
Because it could have been used by someone else and they didn't have to make a new one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff. You mentioned there about how you came up with the topic for your kind of ancient air conditioning video. In that vein, how do you decide what topics to cover in your videos?
I go about it in a few different ways. Sometimes a topic comes to my attention because of a friend or someone who's not a part of the sphere of history. Because to me, that's important because if someone who doesn't necessarily have an interest in it comes up with a subject, I'm more inclined to make a video on it because it could potentially reach the masses, like
Mm,
the ancient air conditioning video actually did. It has more than 1 million views. Never expected to get that on YouTube,
mm,
ever. But at the same time, I also look at Facebook a lot and Twitter, which
yeah.
is now X, but I'm still calling it Twitter. I'm like not converting to X. But yeah, I follow many people on Twitter, archaeologists, geologists, paleontologists, anthropologists, and sometimes they share a thing that's way older, or sometimes they share a new paper that's just been published, or I look on Facebook in one of the history groups that I'm a part of, and sometimes things are shared there. And if a topic interests me, then I will make a video on it. And sometimes on my phone, I will go into the discovery bit of Google Chrome, and then it gives me like all these topics that I might be interested in. Sometimes it's about housing prices, which doesn't interest me at all. But at the same time, sometimes they come up with like new articles that have been published on either new discoveries or like an ancient species, and it's an article that's been like reshared or republished.
Mm.
And that way I come across a new topic. And every so once in a while, I will look at the human evolutionary timeline and the species going like down the road. And then sometimes I see a funny name and I'm like, ah, let's pick that one. Yeah, I'm very fluid in my subject
Yeah.
excursion of like what to make a video on.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say you kind of you like to look at like kind of sometimes the fringe stuff because you think that's what people are interested in, which is I think a whole other conversation in but it's really interesting that comment I think on this trend where people like these alternate I say alternative, but they like they want to know more about these fringe theories, which tend to really annoy archaeologists because it's contradictory a lot of the time to what we have to say. But there's clearly a disconnect between what people really want to know and what the average person is interested in learning about and what an
Yeah,
archaeologist thinks they should be
yeah.
learning about
I mean, I
or what
just,
they think is interesting to them.
yeah, by the time you publish this video and the people are going to see it,
Yeah.
I've released a video on the alien Nazca mummies.
Oh yeah, I saw those in the news. I think I just didn't bother covering them in my archaeology news thing because I was
Of
just like,
course not,
no.
because it's not archaeology, and I just
Yeah.
wrote a 2,000 worded script on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was ready to rip the hairs out of my head because it's not always fun. But at the same
Mm,
time, it just goes into my fact or fiction playlist, and I just give people the information, and whether it's fact or fiction is up to them because I'm not the one who's going to decide what you want to believe in. I'm just
mm,
giving you the information.
yeah.
That's sort of how I go about it at times.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the one that says you are not allowed to believe this because I want to be the person that gives you both sides.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm leaning towards one, but at the same time, I want to make people feel okay with the fact that they want to believe something.
Yeah.
Because I understand the wanting to believe in something
Mm,
bigger and grander and more amazing and aliens and all that stuff. I understand
yeah.
where it comes from, and I respect that desire, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, like you said, like there's this desire to want to kind of believe in something bigger than ourselves, which
Yeah,
like you said, like I get that, but from my perspective as an archaeologist, I feel like that is in some ways the fact that people want to believe in that so badly is in some ways a failing on our part in not being able to communicate properly to people how amazing we are and
yeah,
being able to like fill that gap if that
yeah,
makes sense, and fill that desire based on our research instead of being based on
yeah,
theories that have never been proven and
yeah.
whatever.
Like
Uh,
when I was young, I was more inclined to look at ancient aliens, for example. Like in the very, 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 very beginning of Ancient Aliens, I started looking at it and I was like, oh, this is awesome.
mm,
This is like, oh, a world of possibilities. And I was like dragged into it by my desire to know more about the ancient world.
yeah,
And when I started researching actual history, I found out that the actual history is just as amazing.
yeah,
It's just not as grand, and you can't make a documentary with like these amazing like visuals and all that stuff of
yeah,
ancient aliens and aircrafts, and but at the same time, the fact that they were able to do the things in ancient times that we are excavating and discovering right now,
hmm,
that to me is just equally as amazing.
yeah.
It
No,
doesn't
I
take away
completely
from
agree.
them.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. On to our next question, because I feel like we could just talk about this all night. Outside of what you've already mentioned, if you had a time machine, what era or time would you go back and visit?
If it's an actual time machine,
Yeah.
probably the Neolithic.
Oh,
But if it's like more of like a camera that I can send back in time and keep myself safe at the meantime,
yeah.
I would probably go to like the emergence of the bipedal species or the possible bipedal species in Europe
Yeah.
between 6 to 9 million years ago. The world really wasn't a safe place back then, so I
No.
mean, I would probably die within like 2 hours of like landing. So that's why I'm saying like if I can send back a camera and just look from the safety of a screen, then I
Mm,
would probably do something like that. Or the dinosaurs. I mean,
yeah.
wouldn't it wouldn't it be awesome to like actually see dinosaurs walking?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
like
would be
be
amazing.
able to actually know what they looked like. I mean, yeah, something like that probably.
And we're going to just kind of wrap things up for today. As a heritage influencer, what would you say to like encourage other people to follow in your footsteps, either, starting a channel of their own or even just getting more involved in learning about history?
Well, in order to know where you want to go in life, and in order to know where we as a species are heading towards, I think it's important to keep an eye on the past
Mm.
because history often repeats itself. It's a
Yeah.
saying we all know. But if you don't know your history, you have no idea what's coming. And to
Mm,
me, I feel like if more people were putting their time and effort into the ancient world or history as a whole, if that's like Second World War history or like naval history or whatever, doesn't matter. I think that the world would be a little bit of a better place for everyone
mm,
because currently we see, especially online, we see the emergence of quick content and easy
mm.
content. We see people like just putting on your makeup can
Yeah.
be
Content.
accepted as like full content for people to
Yeah.
view. And I don't want to discredit the people who do it because their makeup and their techniques is like it's incredible and I can't do it. But at the
Mm,
same time, like these TikTok dances, the thirst traps and all that stuff, it's like filling the internet with things that we as a society and a culture and species don't necessarily need.
mm,
I feel like we could use more history and other topics that would fill that void, I think. Because I
mm.
think that there's a void online, especially.
Yeah.
There's a lot of alternative history people that have massive viewers, and it's awesome for them. But at the same time, I would like to see more people doing the actual real stuff.
Yeah.
And
Like you and me.
yes, exactly, like us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you want to pursue archaeology or you just want to like dig, you like digging in the sand, just be an archaeologist or a geologist. I mean, just
Yeah.
do it. It's fun. Get
Yeah.
dirty a little bit.
That's a great answer. Awesome. Well, I think that's everything for today. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel today, Kayleigh. I've really enjoyed having you. I've really enjoyed our friendship that's blossomed over YouTube.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm hoping that this isn't the last time that we do a collaboration together. So I'm sure
Oh
we'll have
no, we'll do
lots of,
many more.
yeah, lots of ideas for things to do in the future. And thank you so much for watching. And thank you so much for being here, Kayleigh.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, time to pack up our trowels. That's everything for today. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Kayleigh. We had a great time filming it, and I'm sure that it's not going to be the last collaboration we do. Don't forget to comment, like the video, or subscribe to both our channels before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, you can give me a super thanks or go to my Ko-fi page, which is in the description, and support me with a small donation of like $1 or $2. Taking a few seconds to support me in any way that you can, if it's just liking or subscribing or making a donation, really helps me grow the channel so that I can continue to provide you with quality heritage content that you can trust is well sourced, researched, and presented by someone who is an expert in this subject. Thank you so much for watching today. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure into the world of archaeology.